They judged me before hearing a single word. The taxi door slammed behind me harder than I expected, the sound echoing across the cold concrete like something final, something that did not care whether I was ready or not, and for a second I just stood there with my hand still on the handle, staring up at the hospital entrance glowing white against the night sky, every window lit, every second inside that building moving faster than my breath could keep up with. And I told myself to move, just move, because somewhere above those lights my husband was lying in a room I could not see, surrounded by machines I could not hear, and the last voice I heard on the phone still rang in my ears, steady but urgent, telling me it would be better if I came now, not later, not in the morning, now, and that word kept pressing against my chest as I stepped forward, my shoes slipping slightly on the damp pavement. The air sharp with that faint antiseptic smell that always seemed to leak out of hospitals even through closed doors, and I tightened my coat around me. Though it did nothing to stop the cold crawling under my skin, I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my throat, in the hollow behind my eyes, and I kept walking, faster now, until the automatic doors were only a few feet away, until I could see my own reflection in the glass, distorted by the light, my face pale, my hair damp from the mist in the air, my eyes wide with something I refused to name. And then it happened, a hand, firm and sudden, cutting across my path like a barrier that had always been there waiting for me. "Stop right there," the voice said, flat, practiced, not loud but impossible to ignore, and I froze, not because I wanted to, but because something in the way he said it made it feel like I had already crossed a line I did not know existed. I looked up slowly and saw him, the uniform crisp, the badge catching the light, his stance steady, rooted, as if the ground itself had decided to stand with him, and for a second I thought maybe this was a misunderstanding, something simple, something that could be fixed with a sentence. "I need to get inside," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, like it had to push through something thick just to reach him, but he did not move, did not soften, did not even really look at me, not the way people look when they see you, more like the way they look at something that needs to be managed, redirected, kept in place. "This entrance is restricted," he replied, each word placed carefully, leaving no space for anything else, and I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger, not yet, just a recognition, the kind that does not come with surprise anymore, the kind that settles in your bones before your mind catches up. I shifted my weight, tried to step around him, just enough to show that I was not asking for permission, that I had somewhere to be, someone waiting for me, but his arm moved again, blocking me with the same calm certainty, and behind me I became aware of movement, people passing, slowing down, glancing. The quiet ripple of attention that spreads without anyone needing to say a word, and I could feel it, that invisible spotlight that never feels warm, only exposing, only measuring. I swallowed and tried again, forcing the words to stay steady. "My husband is inside," I said. "He is in surgery." And for a brief second I thought that might be enough, that the word surgery might crack something open, might remind him that whatever rule he was holding on to had a human side. But his expression did not change, not even a flicker, and the space between us felt colder than the night air, heavier than the silence stretching around us, and I realized then that this was not about a door, not about a policy, not even about timing. It was about who he believed belonged on the other side of that glass, and who did not, and I stood there, inches away from the light, separated by nothing but his arm and everything it represented, breathing in slow, controlled breaths. Because I knew if I let anything else show, anything sharper, anything louder, it would only confirm whatever story he had already decided about me before I even arrived. The rain grew steadier, not loud but constant, each drop tapping against the pavement like a clock counting something I could not afford to lose, and I stayed where I was, close enough to the glass to see movement inside but far enough to feel like I did not belong there, my reflection hovering faintly over the bright lobby, blending with the silhouettes of nurses walking quickly past the reception desk, their steps purposeful, uninterrupted, and I wondered if any of them knew that just a few feet away someone was being held back from reaching the person they loved. Or if this was simply invisible to them the way it so often was, the way moments like this slipped quietly into the background of everyone else's life while they settled permanently into mine, and I lowered my eyes for a second, not in defeat but to steady myself, to keep my voice from breaking when I spoke again, because I had learned that once your voice cracks people stop hearing your words and start hearing your weakness instead, and I could not afford that, not tonight, not here. Please, I said again, softer this time but clearer, each syllable shaped carefully. He is my husband, I just need to see him. And for the first time his gaze shifted slightly, not fully meeting mine but acknowledging that I was still there, still speaking, still not leaving, and there was a pause, small but noticeable, like a door that might open just an inch if given the right pressure, but then it closed just as quickly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he shook his head. You need to wait, he said, the words sounding rehearsed, detached from the urgency that filled my chest, and I felt something inside me sink, not collapse, not disappear, just settle deeper, heavier, like a weight I had carried before in different places, different nights, different doors that did not open when they should have, and behind me I heard a car pull up, tires rolling slowly over wet asphalt, headlights cutting across the ground and stretching my shadow long in front of me, and for a moment I was aware of how I must look. Standing there in a simple coat, hair slightly undone from the damp air, no badge, no uniform, nothing that signaled importance, nothing that told anyone passing by that I had a reason to be inside, that I was not just another interruption in someone else's routine, and that thought lingered longer than I wanted it to, because it was not new, it was familiar, and familiarity made it harder to fight, harder to push back against, and I straightened my shoulders slightly, not to challenge him but to remind myself that I was still present, still standing, still here for a reason that mattered. How long? I asked, and this time my voice did not waver, it held steady, anchored by something deeper than fear, and he did not answer right away, his eyes flicking briefly toward the entrance, then back to me, as if calculating something I could not see, and that silence stretched just long enough to make every second feel deliberate, intentional, and I realized then that waiting was not neutral, it was a decision being made for me, without me. And the realization settled quietly but firmly, and I took a slow breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs, grounding me in the moment, in the reality that no matter how this looked from the outside, no matter how it was being interpreted, I knew why I was here, I knew who I was here for, and that truth did not need to be announced to exist, and yet I also knew that sometimes truth alone was not enough to open doors, sometimes it needed to be seen, recognized, validated by someone standing on the other side, and as I stood there with the rain tracing thin lines down my sleeves and the hospital lights reflecting off the wet ground like something distant and unreachable, I felt the quiet tension of being caught between two worlds, one where I belonged without question, and one where I had to prove it just to take a single step forward, and I did not move, not because I had given up, but because I was choosing my next step carefully, knowing that whatever I did next would not just be about getting inside, it would be about how I was seen when I did. The seconds did not pass the way they normally did, they stretched, bending around the space between me and that door, each one lingering just long enough to remind me that I was still outside, still waiting, still being measured by a standard no one had explained, and I could feel it now more clearly, not just in his posture or his words, but in the quiet certainty behind them, the kind that does not come from rules alone but from belief, from a lifetime of deciding who fits and who does not without ever needing to say it out loud, and I wondered, not for the first time, how many times he had stood like this, how many people he had turned away with the same steady tone, the same unshaken confidence that he was doing the right thing, and whether any of them had looked like me, stood like me, spoken like me, or if I was simply another moment that would pass through his night without leaving any mark at all. And that thought settled in my chest with a quiet weight, not sharp enough to hurt, but heavy enough to notice, and I shifted slightly, the damp fabric of my sleeve brushing against my wrist as I lowered my hand, realizing I had been holding it too tightly around my phone, as if gripping it harder could somehow pull me closer to the room where my husband was lying, and I loosened my fingers slowly, forcing myself to breathe in and out, steady, controlled. The way I had learned to do in rooms where I needed to stay composed even when everything inside me was pulling in the opposite direction, and I glanced past him again, through the glass, catching a glimpse of a nurse pausing at the front desk, her face lit by the glow of a monitor, her expression focused, calm, the kind of calm I wished I could borrow just for a moment. Just long enough to make this feel less like standing at the edge of something I could not cross, and I swallowed, feeling the dryness in my throat despite the damp air around me, and I spoke again, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. "Is there someone I can speak to?" I asked, each word placed carefully, deliberately, because I knew that tone mattered, that how I asked could change how I was heard, and for a brief second there was something like hesitation in his eyes, a flicker so small it could have been missed if I had not been watching so closely, but it was there, and it told me that this moment was not as fixed as it seemed, that there was still space, however narrow, for something to shift. But then his shoulders squared again, settling back into that familiar position, that practiced stillness, and he nodded slightly toward the side. "You can wait over there," he said, gesturing to a bench near the entrance, his voice still even, still distant, as if the solution he offered was reasonable, sufficient, as if waiting was the same as being allowed inside. And I followed his gesture for a second, my eyes landing on the empty bench, its metal surface glistening with a thin layer of rain, untouched, unclaimed, and I imagined myself sitting there, hands folded, watching the doors open and close for everyone else, time slipping past while I remained in place, and something inside me resisted that image, not loudly, not defiantly, but firmly, like a quiet refusal that did not need to be announced to be real. And I turned my gaze back to him, meeting his eyes fully this time, not challenging, not pleading, just present, just there, and I felt the shift in myself. Subtle but undeniable, the moment where waiting stopped being an option I could accept and became something I had to question, not because I wanted to cause trouble, not because I wanted to push against him, but because there was too much at stake to let this moment pass without trying again, and I took another breath, feeling it settle deeper this time, anchoring me in a way the cold air had not, and I said, "I understand you are doing your job." The words coming out steady, respectful, but grounded in something stronger than before. "But I am not leaving this entrance." And the sentence hung between us, not loud, not dramatic, but solid, like something that had finally taken shape after waiting too long to be said. And for the first time since I arrived, the space between us felt different, not smaller, not resolved, but altered, as if something invisible had shifted just enough to be felt, even if either of us acknowledged it out loud. The words settled between us, not loud enough to draw attention but strong enough that I could feel them linger in the air, and for a moment neither of us moved, the rain continuing its quiet rhythm around us, tapping against the pavement, against the metal frame of the bench he had pointed to, against the glass that still separated me from everything I needed to reach, and I watched him closely now, not searching for permission but for understanding, for any sign that he saw me as more than a situation to manage, and his expression shifted just slightly, his brow tightening as if something in my tone had disrupted the pattern he expected, the usual flow of compliance, of people stepping back when told, of moments resolving quickly without resistance. And I could almost see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he measured risk, responsibility, control, and I wondered where I fit into that equation, if I was even part of it at all, or just an obstacle to be moved aside, and he exhaled slowly, not sharply, not impatiently, just enough to signal that something had changed. "You are going to have to step back," he said, the words still firm but carrying a weight that felt less automatic, less certain. And I noticed the difference, small as it was, because I had learned to notice those shifts, those almost invisible changes that revealed more than words ever could, and I shook my head once, not in defiance but in quiet clarity, my voice steady when I spoke again. "I am not causing a problem, I am trying to reach my husband." And the sentence felt different coming out, more grounded, more anchored in something that did not depend on how he responded. And behind me I heard footsteps slow, then stop, the subtle shift of attention growing more noticeable now, a presence forming around the edges of the moment, not loud, not intrusive, but there. Watching, waiting, and I could feel it pressing lightly against my back, the awareness of being seen, of being interpreted, of being placed into a story that was not mine, and I refused to turn around, refused to break the focus I had built, because I knew how quickly a moment like this could be taken out of my hands if I allowed it, how easily it could become something else, something louder, something harder to control. And I stayed where I was, my hands relaxed at my sides, my shoulders still, my breath even, choosing calm not because it was easy but because it was necessary. And he shifted his weight slightly, the movement subtle but enough to break the stillness between us, his hand adjusting near his belt as if grounding himself, reinforcing his position, and I could see the line he was holding, the invisible boundary he believed he was protecting, and I realized then that to him this was not personal, not in the way it was for me. It was procedural, structured, defined by rules that did not account for urgency or emotion, and that realization did not make it easier, but it made it clearer, and clarity gave me something to stand on. Something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain, and I took a small step forward, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to show that I was still moving, still present, still not stepping back, and the space between us tightened again, charged but controlled. And his eyes met mine fully now, no longer looking past me but at me, really at me, and in that moment I saw something new there, not recognition, not yet, but awareness, the beginning of it, the first crack in a surface that had seemed solid just minutes ago. And neither of us spoke for a second, the silence stretching just long enough to feel intentional, like a held breath waiting to see what would come next. And I felt the weight of everything I had not said pressing against that silence, the names, the details, the truth of who I was and why I was here, all of it ready to be spoken, to be placed between us in a way that could change everything. But I held it back, not out of hesitation but out of instinct. Because something inside me told me that this moment needed to shift on its own, that forcing it too soon would only reinforce the barrier instead of breaking it, and so I stood there, steady and unmoving, letting the silence do its work, letting him sit with the reality that I was not leaving, that I was not disappearing into the background the way he might have expected, and the rain continued to fall, soft but persistent, as if echoing the quiet determination settling deeper inside me with every passing second. The tension did not break, it thickened, settling into the space around us like the air before a storm that never quite arrives, and I could feel it now in the way my shoulders held steady, in the way my breath moved slower on purpose, each inhale measured, each exhale controlled, because I knew that losing that control, even for a second, would shift everything in a direction I could not afford, and he remained where he was, unmoving, but no longer untouched by the moment, his eyes no longer sliding past me but holding, studying, as if trying to place something that did not fit the pattern he was used to, and I wondered if he could feel it too, that quiet pressure building, not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable, and behind me the presence of others had grown more defined, a subtle semicircle of awareness forming, people pausing just long enough to notice, to listen without appearing to listen, and I could hear fragments of movement, the soft scrape of shoes, the faint murmur of voices lowered out of courtesy or curiosity, and it would have been easy to turn, to acknowledge them, to let the moment expand outward into something public, something that might force his hand, but I did not. I kept my focus forward, because this was not about them, this was about the line he had drawn and the truth I carried, and I refused to let it become anything else, and he shifted again, a small movement, his posture tightening just slightly as if adjusting to a new kind of pressure, not physical, not external, but internal, the kind that comes when certainty begins to crack just enough to be felt, and his voice came again, firmer this time but not louder. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said, and the words landed differently than before. Not as a command but as a statement that carried a hint of frustration beneath its surface, and I felt that too, the shift from control to discomfort, from routine to something less predictable, and I let a second pass before responding, giving the moment room to settle, to breathe, and when I spoke my voice was calm, almost quiet, but clear in a way that did not need volume to carry. "It is already difficult," I said, and the truth of it hung there, simple, unadorned, impossible to argue. Without dismissing what was right in front of him, And I saw it then, the flicker of something human crossing his expression, not agreement, not understanding, but recognition, the smallest acknowledgement that this was not just another interaction to process and move on from, and for a brief moment the distance between us felt less rigid, less defined, as if the line he was holding had shifted just enough to reveal that it was not as immovable as it seemed, and I took that moment, not by stepping forward but by staying exactly where I was, grounded, present, letting the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel it, to sit with it, and the rain continued its steady rhythm. Soft but persistent, tracing thin lines down the glass behind him, blurring the bright interior into something almost unreachable, and I felt the weight of time pressing in again, sharper now, more urgent, the reminder that every second here was a second I was not there, not inside, not beside the person who mattered most, and that urgency tightened in my chest, pushing against the calm I had built, testing it, asking if it would hold, and I let it pass through me without breaking the surface. Because I knew that what mattered in this moment was not speed, it was presence. It was staying steady long enough for something to change, and his gaze shifted briefly past me, toward the movement behind, then back again, as if aware now that this moment was no longer contained, that it had expanded beyond just the two of us, and I could see the calculation returning, different this time, less certain, more complex, and I realized then that he was no longer just deciding whether to let me through. He was deciding what this moment meant, how it would be seen, how it would be remembered, and I stood there, meeting his eyes without resistance, without retreat, offering nothing but the truth of my presence, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt the balance begin to shift, not in my favor, not yet, but away from the certainty that had held me outside, towards something uncertain, something fragile, something that could still change everything if given just a little more time. The moment did not explode the way moments like this often do in stories people like to tell. It did not rise into shouting or sudden movement. Instead it sank into something quieter, heavier, like a weight pressing gently but firmly against everything around us, and I became aware of the smallest details as if they were the only things keeping time, the faint hum of the lights above the entrance, the soft click of the automatic doors opening and closing for people who passed through without hesitation, the subtle shift of fabric as my sleeve brushed against my wrist when I adjusted my hand just slightly, grounding myself in something physical, something real, and I let my gaze drift for a brief second, not away from him but through him, toward the reflection in the glass, where I could see both of us at once, standing there, in the same frame yet separated by something invisible but undeniable, and I studied that reflection quietly, the way my posture remained upright despite the weight in my chest, the way his stance stayed firm, anchored in place, and I realized how still everything had become, how the world had narrowed to this single moment stretched thin between us, and I drew in a slow breath, deeper than before, letting it fill my lungs completely before releasing it just as slowly, feeling the rhythm settle into me, steady, deliberate, and with that breath something shifted inside me, not a change in intention but a deepening of it, a clarity that no longer depended on how he responded or what happened next, and I felt it settle into my voice before I even spoke. "I am not asking for special treatment," I said, the words quiet but firm, carrying the weight of everything I had held back until now. "I am asking to be seen." And as the sentence left me it did not feel like a challenge or a plea, it felt like a statement that had been waiting too long to exist out loud, and the space between us seemed to absorb it, holding it there, letting it echo in a way that words rarely do, and I watched him carefully, not searching for a reaction but acknowledging whatever came, and for a moment there was nothing, just the steady fall of rain and the distant movement behind the glass, but then his expression changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small ways that added up to something real. The tension in his jaw easing just slightly, his shoulders lowering by a fraction, his gaze holding mine in a way that felt less guarded, less automatic, and I saw it then, not understanding yet, not recognition, but the beginning of something that could become both if given time, and that realization did not bring relief, not yet, but it brought a quiet sense of possibility, fragile but present, and I stood there, allowing the silence to stretch without rushing to fill it, trusting that sometimes what is not said carries more weight than what is, and the rain softened around us, the sound becoming less distinct, more like a backdrop than a force. And for a brief moment everything felt suspended, as if the world had paused just enough to let this moment unfold without interruption, and I became aware of my own heartbeat again, slower now, steadier, no longer racing against time but moving with it, and I held that rhythm, letting it guide me, letting it keep me grounded in a way that nothing else could, and I knew that whatever happened next would come from this space, this stillness, this quiet insistence on being present, and I did not move. Did not step forward or back, I simply remained, anchored in the truth of why I was here, allowing that truth to speak in ways words no longer needed to. The silence held just long enough to feel fragile, like something that could break if either of us moved too quickly, and I stayed within it, letting it stretch without forcing it forward, my breath steady, my shoulders still, my eyes fixed on his, and then the sound came, not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to cut through everything, the low hum of an engine pulling up closer than the others had. Tires easing over the wet pavement with a precision that felt deliberate, and I felt it. Before I turned, that shift in the air, that subtle change in attention from the people behind me, their focus no longer just on us but on something arriving, something that carried its own weight, and the headlights washed briefly across the glass doors, across his uniform, across my hands at my sides, and I saw it then in his expression, the flicker of alertness. The instinctive awareness of something outside his control entering the moment, and I did not move right away, I let the sound settle, let it become part of the space before I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the vehicle come to a stop near the curb, dark, polished, the kind of car that did not need to announce itself because its presence already did, and a door opened, followed by quick footsteps, purposeful, directed, and then a voice, clear and urgent, cutting cleanly through the quiet tension that had built around us. "Where is she?" the man called out, his tone not questioning but searching, and for a second no one answered, the space holding its breath again, and I felt it then, the moment tilting, shifting in a way that was no longer subtle, no longer contained, and the man stepped closer, scanning faces, his eyes moving quickly until they landed on me, and something in his posture changed instantly. Recognition not just forming but settling into certainty. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, and the words landed differently than anything that had been spoken so far, not because of their volume but because of what they carried, and I felt the name move through the space, through the air, through him, and I saw it happen, the exact second it reached him. The way his expression froze, not in confusion but in realization, the kind that arrives all at once and leaves no room to deny it, and the line he had been holding so firmly seemed to dissolve without a sound, his arm lowering, not dramatically, not even consciously, just no longer in place, and the space between us changed completely, not smaller, not wider, but transformed. And for the first time since I had arrived there was nothing physically stopping me from stepping forward, and yet I did not move immediately. I stood there for a fraction of a second longer, feeling the shift settle fully, letting the moment complete itself, and I turned back to him, meeting his eyes again, and what I saw there was not the same certainty, not the same control, it was something else now, something quieter, something unsettled, and neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left that needed to be said to explain what had just happened. And behind me the man who had called my name stepped closer, his presence firm but respectful, as if aware of the moment he had entered, and the rain continued to fall, softer now, almost fading into the background as everything else came into focus, and I took a breath, slow and steady, feeling the air fill my lungs in a way that felt different than before, not lighter, not relieved, but clearer, and then I stepped forward, not quickly, not with urgency, but with a calm that came from knowing I no longer needed to ask, and as I passed him, close enough to feel the space where his arm had been only seconds ago, I did not look away, I did not rush, I simply moved, carrying with me the quiet weight of everything that had just shifted. Everything that had been revealed without needing to be explained. The warmth of the lobby wrapped around me the second the doors opened, not sudden, not overwhelming, but steady, like a space that had always been meant to receive me, and for a brief moment I simply stood there, just inside the threshold, feeling the shift from cold rain to controlled air, from tension to movement, from being held back to finally moving forward, and the sound changed too. The outside quiet replaced by the soft rhythm of footsteps on polished floors, the distant beeping of machines, the low murmur of voices that carried purpose instead of doubt, and I let it settle into me as I took another step, then another, my shoes leaving faint traces of moisture behind me that quickly disappeared into the brightness of the space, and someone approached, a nurse, her expression alert but not alarmed, her eyes moving quickly from my face to the man beside me and back again, as if piecing together the urgency without needing it explained. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice gentle but efficient, and I nodded once, the name landing differently now, not as a revelation but as a confirmation of something that had always been true, something that had simply not been acknowledged until this moment, and she turned slightly, gesturing for me to follow, her steps already moving ahead, confident, practiced, and I followed without hesitation, my focus narrowing to the path in front of me, to the direction she was leading, to the reason I had come here in the first place. And yet even as I moved deeper into the building, I felt it, the echo of what had just happened lingering behind me, not loud, not pulling me back, but present, like a shadow that had not yet decided whether to fade or stay, and I slowed for just a fraction of a second, not enough to stop, just enough to turn my head slightly, to glance back toward the entrance, and there he was, still standing near the doorway, the rain just beyond him, the light catching on his uniform in a way that made him look almost unchanged and yet entirely different at the same time, and I could see it clearly now, the absence of that certainty he had held so firmly before, replaced by something quieter, something heavier. And our eyes met again across the distance, no longer separated by an outstretched arm or an unspoken barrier, just space, and in that space there was no anger, no accusation, just a quiet understanding of what had happened, of what had been assumed, of what had been revealed, and I held his gaze for a moment, not to linger, not to make a point, but to acknowledge that the moment had mattered, that it had left something behind in both of us, and then I turned back, letting the past few minutes settle into something that no longer needed to be carried forward. Because what mattered now was ahead of me, not behind, and the hallway opened wider as I moved deeper inside, the lights brighter, the sounds sharper, the purpose clearer, and I could feel my heartbeat shift again, not slowing, not racing, but aligning with something more focused, more grounded, and as I followed the nurse down the corridor, past rooms where lives continued in quiet, unseen ways, I realized that what had just happened outside would not define this moment, it would not follow me into the room I was about to enter, it would remain where it belonged, at the door, as a reminder of something larger than both of us, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood, and I carried only what I needed forward, the reason I came, the person waiting, the quiet strength that had brought me through that door, and nothing else. The hallway seemed to quiet as we turned the final corner, not because the sounds disappeared but because my mind narrowed to a single point, a single door at the end with a soft glow spilling out beneath it, and the nurse slowed her steps just enough to let me catch up beside her before gently pushing it open, and I stepped inside, the air different here, warmer, steadier, filled with the quiet rhythm of machines that marked time in a way no clock ever could, and there he was, lying still but present, the rise and fall of his chest slow and measured, and for the first time since the phone call, since the rain, since the door that would not open, everything inside me settled into something real, something grounded, and I moved closer, each step softer than the last, until I reached his side and placed my hand lightly over his, feeling the warmth there. The connection that no barrier outside could change, and I stayed like that for a moment, not speaking, not rushing, just letting the silence between us hold everything that words could not carry, and in that stillness I felt it, the full weight of what had just happened, not as something sharp or painful but as something instructive, something that revealed itself slowly, layer by layer, until it became clear in a way that could not be ignored. And I realized that the hardest part had not been the rain or the waiting or even the refusal, it had been the moment of being unseen, of standing right in front of someone and knowing that they had already decided who I was before I had the chance to speak, and that realization stayed with me as I stood there, my fingers gently tightening around his, grounding myself in what was true, in what could not be taken away by assumption or appearance. And I thought about the way the moment had shifted, not because I had raised my voice or forced my way through, but because I had stayed, because I had held on to my calm, because I had refused to disappear even when it would have been easier to step back and accept what was being placed in front of me. And that was where the real change had begun, not in the arrival of the car, not in the recognition of a name, but in the quiet decision to remain present. To stand in my truth without needing to prove it through anything other than my own steadiness. And I looked at him again, at the person who had brought me here, the reason every second had mattered, and I understood something deeper than before, something that reached beyond this room, beyond this night, into something that would stay with me long after everything else faded, and that was this: that dignity does not come from titles or recognition, it does not wait for someone else to grant it or acknowledge it. It exists in the way we carry ourselves when no one is looking, in the way we choose to respond when we are misunderstood, in the quiet strength it takes to remain kind in moments that do not feel kind at all, and I let that settle into me fully. Not as a lesson I needed to repeat, but as something I had lived. Something I had felt in every breath outside that door, and I knew that somewhere behind me, beyond these walls, there was a man standing in the rain who had seen something he might not forget. Not because of who I was connected to, but because of how I had stood in front of him. And maybe that was where change really begins, not in loud moments or dramatic shifts, but in quiet encounters that leave something behind. Something that lingers long after the moment itself has passed, and I stayed there, my hand resting over his, the steady sound of the machines filling the room, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to close my eyes for just a second, breathing in deeply, knowing that no matter what had happened outside, no matter what had been assumed or misunderstood, I had not lost myself in it, and that was something no one could take away.